At my promotion ceremony, the chair reserved for my family stayed empty. They were on a cruise with my sister. I smiled anyway. Hours later, the CEO slipped me a contract that changed my life forever. By midnight, my phone lit up with 74 missed calls and one message from my mom: "We need to talk." People always tell you that the biggest moments of your life will feel like a blur at the lights. The applause, the cameras flashing will swallow you whole and carry you into something new. For me, it wasn't the blur I remember. It was the silence. The company auditorium was packed. Rows of executives in pressed suits, co-workers with their spouses and kids, families holding up phones to capture every second. There were balloons in the corners, gold lettering across the stage backdrop, champagne flutes filled with orange juice on trays by the door. Everyone had someone there. Everyone but me. My eyes kept sliding to the front row, to the seat I had reserved. It had my family's name printed on a little white card, reserved for the Parkers. The card was still there, untouched, perfectly centered on the cushion. No coats, no purses, no hurried footsteps making their way down the aisle at the last second, just an empty chair. I'd told myself not to expect much. My parents had already said they'd booked a cruise with my sister Sophie months ago, but some foolish part of me still believed maybe they'd changed their plans, maybe they'd surprise me, maybe this time would be different. It wasn't. When my name was called, I walked across the stage with a smile fixed to my face. The CEO shook my hand, cameras snapped, applause echoed, but all I could see was that vacant seat staring back at me. I told myself to focus, to act proud, to make it look like none of it mattered. Inside, though, it felt like the loudest silence I'd ever heard, and then something unexpected happened. The CEO held onto my handshake longer than usual. He slipped me an envelope. I thought it was just paperwork, maybe a formality. But when I opened it, the words on the page shifted everything I thought I knew about my future. That night, when the crowd had gone home and the stage lights dimmed, I walked back to my apartment alone. No celebration, no family dinner, no photos with smiling parents. Just me, takeout food, and the echo of that empty chair burned into my mind. I didn't realize then how important that silence would become, because later, when my phone lit up, with missed calls, dozens of them, stacked one on top of another, I finally understood that the story of that night wasn't the promotion. It was the absence. When I finally got home that night, the apartment felt too quiet. I dropped the envelope with my new contract on the counter and tried not to think about the chair that had stayed empty. I ordered takeout, cracked open a beer, and let the television play some late-night rerun. I wasn't watching. It wasn't until close to midnight that I picked up my phone. The screen lit up like a siren. 74 missed calls. Dozens of unread messages stacked one after another, as if the phone itself had been in a state of panic. My voicemail icon looked ready to burst. At the very top, a single message from my mother. "We need to talk." The first voicemail was her voice, trembling. She said they hadn't realized the ceremony was such a big deal, that I shouldn't be upset, that family was what really mattered. In the background, I could hear music, laughter cruise ship noise. She was crying, but it didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like someone afraid of losing control. The second voicemail was different. Sophie's voice this time, no tears, just a laugh and a slurred shout over the sound of clinking glasses. She congratulated me, then immediately asked if I could wire her some money because she'd gone over budget on the trip. "Drinks on you, big brother," she said, as if my promotion meant her vacation had a new sponsor. I stopped listening after that. I didn't delete them. I didn't call back. I just set the phone down on the counter and opened another beer. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel any obligation to answer. The next morning, the storm began again. Calls at 7 sharp, one after another, mom, dad. So feel like they had divided the day into shifts. By lunch, emails started, flooding in too. Subject lines read like warnings. "Call us immediately. This isn't funny. Don't ignore your family." It was almost theatrical, the way they tried to claw their way into my attention. I pictured them sitting together on that cruise ship, phones pressed to their ears, racking up international charges just to remind me I was still theirs to claim. Only this time, I wasn't playing along. At work, the promotion had already changed. Things Coworkers who used to overlook me now stopped in the hallway with careful smiles. Conversations grew hushed when I passed. Respect, curiosity, envy, it was all there, and instead of making me uncomfortable, it fueled me. Every nod of recognition made my family's absence feel smaller, their approval less necessary. Still, by midweek, the pressure broke through. My father called again, and this time I answered. He didn't even bother with a greeting, and that's where the next crack appeared, because the first words out of his mouth weren't about me. They were about money. When I finally picked up my father's call, I half expected some kind of apology, a recognition of what they'd missed. Maybe even the words I had been waiting my entire life to hear. But there was nothing like that. He jumped straight in, his tone flat, almost rehearsed. "Ethan, listen. We didn't know the ceremony was such a big deal. Your mom and Sophie had already planned the trip. It was paid for. We figured you'd understand." I said nothing. I just let the silence stretch. He tried again, filling the void with words he thought would smooth it over. "But family is family. We shouldn't let one night come between us. You've always been the dependable one, and that's not something to throw away." That line almost made me laugh. One night, my entire adult life had been built on sacrifices for them. I was the one patching their roof instead of going out with friends. I was the one transferring money so Sophie's credit cards didn't collapse into collections. I was the one covering overdue bills so their lights didn't go out. And the single night I asked them to show up, they were sipping cocktails on a cruise deck. Still, I held my tongue, and that's when he said it. The words that cut through everything. "Anyway, I'm a little behind on a couple of bills. Just temporary. You know how it is. Maybe you can help out this month. With your new salary, it's not a big deal for you." I froze. My new salary? I hadn't told them the numbers. I hadn't told anyone. The details of my contract weren't public, and HR was careful, paranoid even, about keeping compensation private. Yet here was my father, speaking about it like it was common knowledge. I asked quietly, "Who told you that?" There was a pause, then a weak answer. "Your mom talked to someone who knows someone in HR. Word gets around." No, that wasn't how my company worked. Salaries didn't get around. The way he said it, like he was already building a case against me, set off alarms in my head. It wasn't curiosity, it was strategy. I ended the call quickly, muttering that I had to go, but my mind kept circling the same thought for the rest of the night. How far were they willing to go to keep their grip on me? Later, sitting in the dim glow of my apartment, I stared at the unopened messages piling up again. The calls weren't just about guilt anymore. They were about leverage, and I had no idea just how deep they were already digging. The answer came sooner than I expected delivered, not by my family, but by a stranger who seemed to know too much. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the glow of the contract still, sitting on the counter, untouched, as if I didn't trust it was real. My father's words kept circling in my head, how casually he had mentioned my salary, how quickly the conversation had shifted from excuses to requests for money. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe someone at work had let something slip, but deep down, I knew better. Nothing about my company's payroll ever slipped. I was halfway through cold noodles when my laptop chimed, "New email." The address wasn't one I recognized. A throwaway Gmail account, just a jumble of letters and numbers. At first, I assumed it was spam, but the subject line made my stomach clench. They're planning something. I opened it. There was no greeting, no explanation, no link to click. Just one short message. "Don't trust them. They've been digging into your finances. Ask yourself why." That was it. No signature. No request for money. No scammer's hook. Just a warning stripped down to its bones. For a long moment, I sat frozen, staring at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something harmless. But they didn't. They only confirmed what I already suspected. My father hadn't heard about my salary. They had gone looking. They had pried open doors that weren't meant for them. The strangest part was that the email didn't feel random. It wasn't the kind of thing you send to a stranger on a whim. Someone knew what was happening. Someone close enough to see it unfold had decided to tip me off. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I just closed the laptop and sat there in the dark. For years, I thought the worst my family could do was ignore me, dismiss me, bleed me dry with small requests. But now a new thought dug its claws into me. What if they wanted more than handouts? What if to them, my promotion wasn't my success? Was their opportunity? I barely slept that night. Every vibration from my phone felt like a threat. Every shadow in my apartment felt like it was leaning closer. By morning, I wasn't just suspicious. I was afraid. And 2 days later, when the truth finally stepped out of the shadows and introduced itself, I realized the email had been more than a warning. It had been a lifeline. 2 days passed, but the email clung to me like smoke. I tried to bury myself in work, but every line of text blurred together. My mind kept circling back to that message there. Planning something? It was late one evening when I finally got an answer. I was leaving the office, jacket over my arm, when I heard someone call my name, Ethan. I turned. It was Marcus, one of the senior accountants. He wasn't the type to linger or make small talk. Always polished, always on schedule. But that night, he looked diffnosy, like he was about to confess something he shouldn't. He walked up slowly, lowered his voice. "You got my message." For a second, I didn't understand. My message. Then it hit me. The email. "That was you?" I asked. He nodded once. I couldn't risk using my work address. The air seemed to shift around us. We stood in the quiet lobby, the glass doors, reflecting the city lights outside. And he told me everything. "Your mother called payroll last week," he said. "She claimed she was helping you with your taxes. She asked them to confirm your salary, then started pressing for details, bonuses, stock options, payout schedules. HR shut her down, but it got flagged and passed my way. I thought you should." No, for a moment, I couldn't speak. My own mother pretending to be my tax assistant just to pry open my finances. Marcus kept going, his voice low and steady. "I've seen this before. Someone in the family makes it big, and suddenly, everyone else starts circling. It doesn't stop with one request. It escalates. They'll come back again and again until there's nothing left. Be careful." He gave me a look sharp, almost pitying, and then he walked away. Just like that, I stood there frozen, gripping my jacket so tightly my knuckles ached. The confirmation hit harder than the warning. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They weren't just careless. They were actively plotting, probing, testing the locks on every door of my life to see what they could pry open. Driving home that night, the city lights blurred past like streaks of fire. For the first time, I started to wonder if the damage had already been done. If they were willing to lie to my company just to sniff out my income, what would stop them from going further? And that thought followed me into the weekend, right up until the moment they showed up at my door with smiles on their faces and a pitch rehearsed down to the last word. It was a Saturday morning when the knock came. Firm, repeated, not the kind of knock you ignore. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I thought it might be a delivery. But when I opened the door, my parents were standing there. They had never shown up at my place unannounced before. Not once. And that alone set every nerve in my body on edge. My mother smiled too brightly, her eyes scanning past me into the apartment, like she was already making herself at home. My father stood behind her, hands in his pockets. The picture of someone pretending this was casual. "Ethan, we thought we'd stop by," my mother said, stepping forward as if waiting for me to move aside. I didn't. I stayed in the doorway. "What's going on?" She didn't waste time. "Your father and I have been thinking. This little cafe downtown. Perfect spot. Ready for new ownership. Or maybe a rental property. Either way, it's a smart investment. And with your new situation, we thought you'd want to partner with us." Partner. The word hung there like a trap. My father nodded quickly, eager to add his part. It would be a family thing. You'd benefit just as much as we would. Everyone wins. I stared at them. They were polished, rehearsed, almost proud of themselves, as if they were offering me some great opportunity. But all I could hear was the echo of Marcus's warning, circling, "It doesn't stop." I asked quietly, "So that's why you came here?" My mother's smile thinned. "Don't make it sound like that. We've always supported you. Everything you are is because of us. We gave you everything. Now it's time to give back." Give back. The phrase hit harder than anything else. Because in that moment, I realized they didn't see my success as mine. They saw it as theirs. They weren't asking me for help. They were demanding payment. On a debt I never owed. I took a step back, my hand still on the door. "I've got a busy weekend," I said flatly. My mother's voice sharpened. "Ethan, don't you dare shut us out. This is about family." I looked her in the eye. "Exactly. And that's why I'm closing the door." And I did. On the other side, I heard my father mutter something about me being ungrateful. My mother knocked once, twice, her voice rising, but eventually the footsteps faded. The silence that followed was heavier than anything they had said. Inside, I stood still, my chest tight, my thoughts racing. They hadn't come for reconciliation. They hadn't come for family. They had come with a business plan, a scheme, and the certainty that I would bankroll it without question. And if they were willing to show up at my door with that kind of arrogance, I had no doubt this was only the beginning. After that morning at the door, something inside me hardened. For years, I had played the role they wrote for Mitha, dependable one, the fixer, the son who would clean up every mess. But when I shut the door in their faces, I realized I didn't have to play along anymore. I didn't shout. I didn't confront them. I didn't demand apologies or explanations. Instead, I chose silence. Quiet, deliberate silence. And silence can be sharper than any argument. The first move was simple. Back in college, I had made the mistake of opening a joint credit card for Sophie. At the time, it was for emergencies only. But emergencies had turned into shopping sprees, late-night bar tabs, weekend getaways. She always promised to pay me back. She never did. That Sunday evening, I logged into the account, cleared the balance, and closed it permanently. Done. No warning, no explanation. Just one cord cut clean. Next was the gas bill. For years, I had it set to autopay because they kept forgetting, and I couldn't stand the thought of them sitting in the dark. I didn't even notice the charge anymore. It was just background noise on my bank statement, but now I deleted my payment info. If the notices piled up, they would have to deal with them on their own. Then came the texts. The vague, casual requests Sophie had perfected. "Rent's late this month. Can you spot me just this once?" Or, "My paycheck didn't clear. Can you cover until Friday?" In the past, I would have sent the money without hesitation, convincing myself it was easier than saying no, but this time I didn't even respond. Watching those messages stack up unread gave me a strange sense of peace. I thought the fallout would be immediate furious calls, guilt-soaked speeches, accusations hurled like knives. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, it seeped in sideways. Not from them directly, but from people I hadn't heard from in years. My aunt called one evening, her voice sweet at first, then circling the subject like a vulture. "You know, your parents sacrificed a lot for you. Family has to look out for each other. That's what matters in the end." Then, almost like an afterthought, she mentioned she'd heard I was doing really well now, and that it was a blessing. For everyone. The next day, my cousin Eric messaged me out of nowhere. "Congrats on the big raise, man. Heard you're killing it. So listen, I've got this little side hustle, just need some capital. Would love to bring you in." That's when I realized what was happening. My parents weren't just scheming on their own. They were spreading the story, turning my success into public knowledge, parading me like some golden goose the family could line up behind. And the whispers kept growing. Each call, each message, was another hand reaching out. Not in congratulations, not in support, but in expectation. I knew then this wasn't just about cutting off bills or ignoring texts. This was about rewriting the story they were telling. About me, and the only way to do that was to face them directly on their turf. In front of the very people they'd been rallying behind, their lies. My grandfather was the one who insisted I go. "There's a barbecue this weekend at your uncle's place," he told me over the phone. "Show up. Trust me, it's time you stop letting them control the story." I wanted to say no. The thought of standing in a backyard full of people who suddenly remembered my name the moment they heard I was making money felt like walking into a trap. But my grandfather rarely asked for anything, and something in his tone told me he knew this would matter. So I went. From the second I stepped into the yard, I felt it. The shift in the air. Relatives who used to pass me by without more than a nod were suddenly warm, smiling too wide, patting my back like we were lifelong friends. The grill smoked in the corner. Kids ran through sprinklers. But beneath it all was a current I couldn't ignore expectation. My mother was in her element. She stood in the middle of a small circle, laughing too loud, wine glass in hand. Her voice carried over the hum of conversation. "Travis is finally in a position to take care of the family," she said, as if she were announcing it to the world. "We've been thinking about upgrading to a bigger place soon." It wasn't said like a plan. It was said like a promise. A done deal. Heads turned toward me, and I felt their eyes linger. My uncle clapped me on the back so hard my drink nearly spilled. "Good man, family first. You'll never regret it." Even my cousin Eric cornered me, his smile sharp. "So, about that investment opportunity, perfect timing now, huh?" Everywhere I turned, someone was waiting. Not to congratulate me, not to ask how I was doing, but to see what piece of me they could claim. It felt less like a family gathering and more like an auction, and I was the prize on display. I scanned the crowd, searching for something solid, and found it. My grandfather, sitting off to the side in a lawn chair, arms crossed, his gaze steady. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't join in the charade. When our eyes met, he gave me a single nod, not encouragement, not pity, permission. Permission to finally tear the mask off this entire performance. I put my plate down on the nearest table, my pulse hammering in my ears. My mother was still holding court, spinning her story about the house I was supposedly buying. She was laughing like it was already real, like I was just a formality away from handing over the keys and standing there surrounded by a family who saw me as a wallet instead of blood. I knew exactly what I had to do. I didn't plan what I was going to say. The words came out of me raw, unpolished, sharp enough to cut. "I'm not buying anyone a house." The sound carried louder than I expected, cutting across the backyard. Conversations faltered, then stopped. Plates hovered midair. Even the kids seemed to sense something had cracked, their laughter fading into silence. I kept going, my voice, steady but louder now, making sure every set of eyes heard me. "I'm not paying your bills. I'm not funding Sophie's lifestyle. I'm not investing in anyone's business. I'm done being the family wallet." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. My uncle blinked at me, confused, as if I had spoken in a language he didn't understand. My cousin Eric gave a nervous laugh, like maybe this was a joke. My mother's smile froze, her knuckles whitening around her wine glass. "Ethan," she said quickly, her tone sharp but still coated with sugar, "don't say that here. People will misunderstand." I turned to her. "They've already misunderstood, because you told them lies." Her face flushed. "Lies." "I was just—" "No," I cut in, my voice sharper. "You stood here and told everyone I was buying you a house. You made promises I never made. You turned me into a story you could sell to them, like I was some kind of prize you earned." "Well, I'm not." My father finally spoke, his voice low, muttered ungrateful. That word hit the air like a spark, and before I could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Ungrateful? It was my grandfather. He rose slowly from his chair, his presence commanding in a way I had never seen before. His voice carried across the yard like steel on glass. "Let me remind everyone here," he said, sweeping his eyes across the crowd. "Ethan is the only one who has ever carried weight in this family. He paid your bills, bailed you out of debt, kept your lights on, and you repaid him with excuses and vacations. Now that he's finally built something for himself, you want to bleed him dry all over again. That's not family, that's leeching." The words landed like blows. My mother's face went pale. My father stared at the ground. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, pretending they hadn't been part of the chorus. Eric opened his mouth, trying to spin it into a misunderstanding. But my grandfather wasn't done. "And let me make something clear," he said, his voice firm, final. He turned to my parents. "You've spent your lives manipulating and taking, and it ends now. Don't think you'll be inheriting a dime from me. You won't. I'd rather leave it all to Ethan, the only one who understands the value of what he earns." The backyard was dead quiet. The only sound was the hiss of the grill and the wind rustling through the trees. My mother tried to protest, her words stumbling over each other, something about family unity, about keeping peace, but no one was listening anymore. The mask had slipped, and everyone had seen what was underneath. I didn't stay long after that. I shook a few polite hands, thanked my grandfather quietly, and walked out through the side gate. As I stepped onto the street, I felt the weight shift off me, replaced with something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not the kind that comes after escaping one fight, but the kind that comes when you finally realize you don't owe anyone anything anymore. But freedom is never without fallout, and in the days that followed, the silence of that backyard would explode into chaos I knew was waiting for me. The silence after the barbecue didn't last long. By the time I got home that night, my phone was already buzzing again, lit up with the kind of desperate energy I knew too well. My mother's texts came first, long, frantic paragraphs at all hours of the night. One message accusing me of humiliating her in front of everyone. "You embarrassed us. How could you turn the family against us?" The next message dripping with sweetness, pretending the whole thing never happened. "We're so proud of you, Ethan. Let's put this behind us and move forward as a family." The contradictions would have been almost funny if they weren't so predictable. My father only called once. His voice was flat, stripped of any warmth. He didn't mention the barbecue at all. Instead, he went straight to the point. "Things are tight this month. Could you help with the mortgage? With your salary, it's nothing to you." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just hung up. Sophie was slower to respond, but when she did, it was like she'd been holding in weeks of rage. She sent a voice message, her tone sharp and venomous. She accused me of being selfish, of abandoning them when I finally had the means to support the family. She ended with her real demand money for her car, which had apparently broken down. "I can't get to work until you send me the money. Ethan, you're ruining my life." That one, I didn't even bother opening a second time. But the real surprise wasn't them. It was the relatives. One by one, a few of them reached out privately. An aunt messaged me to say she hadn't realized how much I had been carrying for years, that she had believed my mother's version of me cold, distant, ungrateful. But after hearing my grandfather lay it all out, she saw things differently. Another cousin called just to apologize, his voice awkward but sincere. I didn't know. I should have known. It wasn't everyone. Some relatives went quiet clearly. Embarrassed, others doubled down on the story my mother had spun, choosing comfort in her narrative over the discomfort of truth. But a crack had opened, and for the first time, it felt like people were finally seeing me for who I was, not who my parents said I was. Through it all, my grandfather kept calling, never with demands, never with guilt. Just short check-ins, his voice steady on the other end of the line. "Proud of you, son. Took you long enough to stop playing their game. Now live your life." That meant more than anything the others tried to say sitting in my apartment a few nights later. Takeout boxes stacked on the counter, my phone blessedly quiet for the first time in years. I realized something I never thought I would. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peace. But peace has a price. And the more I leaned into it, the more I understood that this wasn't just a single break, it was a fracture that would split the family in two. In the weeks after the barbecue, the family stopped feeling like one family at all. It fractured, clean down the middle, like a plate dropped on the floor. On one side were the relatives who had built their lives around my parents' stories, the ones who preferred to believe I was selfish, cold, and ungrateful. They clung to that version of me because it justified their silence all those years, because admitting the truth meant admitting they'd let me carry everything alone. On the other side were the ones who had sat in that backyard and heard my grandfather's words echo louder than my mother's lies. For them, the mask was gone. They couldn't unsee it. They reached out quietly, not to demand anything, but to acknowledge what they had ignored. It started small. My Aunt Linda called one evening, her voice softer than I remembered. "I didn't realize how much you'd done for them, Ethan. I always thought you kept your distance because you wanted to. Now I see it was survival." She didn't ask me for money. She didn't even ask me for forgiveness. She just admitted it. And that was more than I ever expected. But others doubled down. My cousin Eric sent a furious message after I ignored his business pitch. He called me arrogant, accused me of thinking I was better than the rest of them. "You'll regret shutting us out," he wrote. "Family doesn't forget." I stared at his words for a long time before deleting the message without responding. Even holidays became battlegrounds. Invitations arrived late or not at all. Stories circulated, twisted just enough to paint me as the villain who had turned his back on his blood. At one dinner I didn't attend, a relative told me later, my mother went on about how I had changed since the promotion, how money had poisoned me. But then, in the same breath, she hinted I might still come around. That I'd eventually do the right thing and buy them the house they were already describing to people as if it existed. It was surreal listening to how they rewrote reality to suit themselves. Through it all, my grandfather stayed steady. He told me he'd seen this kind of fracture before: jealousy, pride, desperation pulling a family apart. "The difference," he said, "is that you've finally drawn the line. And once a line is drawn, people have to choose which side of it they stand on." He was right. The split wasn't temporary. It was permanent. And I had stopped hoping it could ever be fixed. But in that realization, there was something else, to relief, because I wasn't fighting for their approval anymore. I wasn't trying to be understood. I was simply living without the weight of their expectations crushing me. And the more I leaned into that freedom, the more I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. The weeks turned into months. And with every day that passed, the distance between me and my family didn't shrink, it grew wider, deeper, permanent. But instead of fear, I felt clarity. For the first time in my life, I was no longer looking over my shoulder, waiting for their approval or bracing for their disappointment. The final shift came quietly, not in a confrontation, not in a dramatic phone call, but in the silence of an ordinary evening. I was sitting in my apartment with the city lights spilling through the blinds, my phone on the counter. It buzzed once, another message from my mother. I didn't open it. I didn't even look. I just let it sit there, ignored, until the screen went dark again. That small act, that refusal to let their words dictate my mood, felt like crossing an invisible line. For years, they had conditioned me to answer, to react, to bend. And now, by doing nothing at all, I had finally taken back control. I thought about the empty chair at my promotion ceremony, the one that had haunted me for weeks. Back then, I saw it as abandonment, as proof I didn't matter to the people who were supposed to care most. But now, I saw it differently. That chair wasn't a wound. It was a warning, a symbol of the truth I had refused to face. They were never going to show up for me, because in their minds, my role was never to be celebrated. It was to serve, and I was done serving. That realization reshaped everything. When my father called, again his voice weary with another excuse about bills, I didn't hang on his every word the way I used to. I ended the call mid-sentence and went back to what I was doing. When Sophie sent another chain of angry voice notes about her car, her rent, her endless emergencies, I didn't reply. I didn't even flinch. It wasn't anger anymore. Anger meant I still needed something from them. What I felt now was colder, cleaner, freedom. And freedom changed how I saw the word family. Blood wasn't the measure. Obligation wasn't love. Family, I realized, wasn't about who demanded the most from you. It was about who stood with you even when there was nothing to gain. That truth was driven home every time my grandfather called. His check-ins were simple. No drama, no guilt. Just a steady voice reminding me that not everyone with my last name had failed me. "Proud of you, son," he'd say. "Now, live your life." Those words were worth more than every empty promise my parents had ever made. By the time the next holiday rolled around, the split in the family was complete. Some stayed loyal to my parents, convinced I had turned cold. Others, quietly, began treating me with a respect they had never shown before. But I no longer cared who stood where. I had drawn my line, and for once, I was standing on solid ground. The debt I thought I owed them had never existed, and the moment I stopped paying it, I finally owned my life. Looking back now, the story wasn't really about a promotion or a paycheck. It wasn't about the chair that sat empty at my ceremony, or even the confrontation that tore through the backyard at that barbecue. Those were just the sparks. The fire had been burning for years, hidden under the weight of my silence. Used to believe family meant sacrifice, that love was measured by how much you were willing to give, even if you got nothing back. I told myself that if I just worked harder, helped more, gave more, eventually they'd see me. Eventually they'd be proud. But the truth was simpler and harsher. They weren't waiting to be proud. They were waiting for me to fall back in line. And the moment I stepped off that path, the moment I stopped playing the role they'd written for me, the mask slipped. What I saw underneath wasn't family. It was control, expectation, entitlement. The shift came when I stopped asking why they didn't show up for me and started asking why I kept showing up for them. That's when everything changed. Now, when I think of that empty chair, I don't see abandonment anymore. I see a warning that saved me years of wasted loyalty. I see the moment I was forced to face the truth I had been avoiding. And most of all, I see freedom. Freedom from the constant demands, the guilt, the manipulation. Freedom to live on my terms, not theirs. Do I regret cutting them off? No. Regret belongs to people who still wish for a different ending. I don't, because I finally understand that I don't owe them anything. Not my money, not my silence, not my life. And as strange as it sounds, I'm grateful. Grateful for the silence that once felt unbearable, because now it's the sound of peace. Grateful for the fracture, because it showed me who stood with me when there was nothing left to take. Family isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who shows up when no one else does. And for me, that truth is worth more than any inheritance, any approval, any seat they could have filled that day. In the end, walking away wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was admitting the debt I thought I owed. My family had never been real. Once I let that go, I finally had my life back on my terms. And sometimes, the quiet that follows is the loudest kind of freedom. If this story gripped you, don't forget to hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful family drama stories. Your support helps us bring you even more tales that keep you on the edge of your seat.